In the deepest hush of a storm-laden night, Buckingham Palace exhaled a secret, older than its own marble halls. A single lamp flickered in the Queen's private study, its tremor casting shadows that seemed almost sentient, as though the walls themselves were breathing her unease. Outside, the wind clawed at the draped windows, whispering the same forbidden name over and over, a name erased from every record, every portrait, every prayer uttered within these gilded walls. The Queen stood alone, her gloved hand trembling above a silver key hidden within her desk drawer. It was time, she decided, to return to the room no one was supposed to know existed, the room her father had ordered sealed before his death. The air thickened as she pressed the key to her lips, whispering a vow. Let the past forgive me for what I must uncover. And somewhere, far beneath the East Wing, a lock turned for the first time in 50 years. The corridor beneath the East Wing was colder than she remembered, a place forgotten by warmth or prayer. Queen Eleanor's candle sputtered against the draft, revealing bricks once white, but now bruised with age. She recognized the pattern of the seal her father had carved, two lions intertwined around a crown, the royal sigil altered to conceal what it guarded. Her pulse thudded in her ears as she pressed her palm to the wall. The stone shuddered faintly, responding like a heartbeat. Behind it, she felt the thrum of a presence, not ghostly, but human. Memories clawed back, her father's final warning, never go below the East Wing. Some bloodlines are better buried. Yet now, with every breath, the truth beneath her dynasty demanded air. The hidden wall gave way with a reluctant sigh. Beyond it, a chamber stretched outward, silent, untouched, draped in thick velvet that had surrendered to time. A single chair stood at its center, facing an antique gramophone that spun slowly, though no record played. On the far wall hung a family portrait she did not recall ever posing for, one in which her father's arm rested upon a young boy she had never seen. His eyes, pale and hauntingly familiar, seemed to follow her. Eleanor's breath hitched as realization clawed at her chest. This room wasn't built to hide a relic. It was built to hide a person. The Queen's knees weakened as she reached for the portrait. Dust cascaded like ash. Beneath the frame's edge, she found a date scrawled in her father's unmistakable handwriting. 1943, the day we locked him away. The candle slipped from her grasp, the flame flickering dangerously near old papers scattered below. Records sealed with the royal crest. Names, dates, bloodlines. Her hand hovered over one parchment, its ink bleeding from time. Subject: Thomas Windsor, declared deceased by royal decree. A tear struck the page, blurring the word deceased. The truth was no longer buried. It was breathing behind these walls. A soft noise, a shuffle, barely audible. Eleanor froze. The sound came again, closer now, from behind the largest curtain. Every instinct urged her to flee, but her lineage would not permit cowardice. With deliberate care, she pulled the fabric aside. Behind it, a narrow doorway gaped open, revealing a smaller chamber, lit faintly by a single oil lamp still burning. On a wooden chair sat a man, frail but alive, his face hidden beneath a gray hood. His voice broke the silence like splintered glass. "You took your time, sister." The Queen's breath caught. The impossible had a voice, and it knew her name. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the slow, uneven breathing of two ghosts bound by blood and silence. The Queen's heart hammered with disbelief. The face before her was both foreign and achingly familiar. His eyes, icy blue, her father's eyes, reflected decades of betrayal. Thomas's lips curled into a trembling smile. "Did he tell you I was dead?" The words struck her like a blade of glass. She whispered his name, as if saying it could undo the years lost. "Why?" she demanded, voice cracking. Thomas tilted his head, his gaze drifting toward the ceiling as if the palace itself were listening. "Because I wasn't born to inherit the throne," he murmured, "but to destroy it." Thomas rose slowly, his movements fragile, like a man learning the rhythm of freedom for the first time. "He said you would never come," he murmured, eyes narrowing as they caught the glint of her crown brooch. "He said you would choose the throne over truth." The Queen's voice steadied, but her fingers clenched. "Father did what he must. For the kingdom." Thomas's laugh was low, hollow. "For the kingdom," he echoed. "He buried his son alive, Eleanor." She flinched as if struck. The shadows seemed to thicken between them, alive with memory and accusation. "He said I was cursed," Thomas whispered, stepping closer. "But the curse was never mine." The Queen stepped back, struggling to breathe under the weight of his words. "You speak of curses, Thomas. What curse?" He turned, motioning toward an old trunk by the wall. Inside, preserved like relics, lay journals, photographs, and sealed letters bearing their father's crest. "He feared what the world would say if it learned the truth," Thomas said, voice trembling. "That the royal bloodline wasn't pure, that his firstborn son was the proof." The air turned to glass. "Firstborn?" Eleanor whispered. "You." He nodded slowly. "I was heir before you until the night he erased me." The Queen's hand went to her chest, feeling her crown's weight shift from honor to sin. A thunderclap boomed above the palace, shaking dust from the ceiling. Thomas's voice grew hoarse. "Our mother knew. She begged him to let me live free, even if nameless. But he couldn't bear the scandal, the bloodline, tainted by what she hid." Eleanor's breath caught. "What did she hide, Thomas?" His gaze met hers, filled with a sorrow deeper than rage. "She wasn't who he said she was. Not noble. Not of royal descent. She was a maid. The one he loved in secret before he was crowned." The Queen staggered backward. The scandal she'd feared all her life, her family's foundation, was built on deceit. "You're saying that I am the son of love," he said softly, "and you are the child of duty." The Queen's world tilted. The polished portraits in the palace above meant nothing now, each frame a lie. "If this is true," she whispered, "then the crown rests on false lineage." Thomas smiled faintly, a tragic curl of lips. "You see now why he hid me. He feared history's judgment more than God's." Eleanor's tears blurred the candlelight. "You were punished for his sin," she said softly, "and you wore his guilt in silence." He reached out, his fingers brushing hers. Two lives divided by a secret finally breathing in the dark. "I waited," he said, "for the Queen to remember she was also a sister. And for the first time in decades, she did." Dawn broke reluctantly over Buckingham Palace, its golden rays crawling across the marble floors like hesitant confession. Queen Eleanor stood before her window, still cloaked in the scent of candle smoke and dust. The revelation gnawed at her. That the blood in her veins, the crown upon her head, were bound by deceit. She saw her father's portrait in the hallway below, and could almost hear his voice. "The throne demands silence," but Thomas's voice lingered louder now, unyielding. "And truth demands a voice." She turned toward the mirror, not the Queen of England, but a woman standing on the fragile line between legacy and justice. Somewhere in the East Wing, she could still hear his chains echoing like gilt and stone. The palace corridors were already stirring, with staff unaware of the secret breathing beneath their feet. Lady Margaret Ashton, the Queen's loyal secretary, entered quietly, carrying the morning dispatch. "Your Majesty, the Prime Minister requests a private audience," she said, unaware of the storm behind the Queen's eyes. Eleanor nodded faintly, masking turmoil beneath composure. "In 1 hour," she replied. When Margaret left, Eleanor's composure cracked. She opened her father's diary, the one she had found in Thomas's chest. His handwriting trembled with confession. The crown must be clean, even if the blood is not. The queen closed the book with trembling fingers. What if the purity of the crown was its greatest lie? In the private audience chamber, Prime Minister Richard Hargrove waited, his expression calculated politeness hiding the sharp intuition that had won him power. "Your Majesty," he said with a shallow bow, "there are whispers again about the archives, documents from your father's reign that were never accounted for." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Whispers?" she asked. "From where?" "The press. They've received something damning." She steadied her voice. "And what do they claim?" The Prime Minister leaned closer. "That your family's bloodline may not be as unbroken as history claims." Silence filled the chamber like smoke. "Destroy it," she said softly. But her heart fractured with every word. When the Prime Minister departed, the Queen summoned Thomas to her private quarters. He entered silently, his posture defiant but weakened by years of confinement. "They know," she said. His expression faltered. "Then let them. You would see our family destroyed?" she asked. "Not destroyed," he replied. "Redeemed." She stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Redemption doesn't rebuild empires." "No," he said, voice low, "but it ends lies." Her hand trembled over the bell cord, the signal that could send him back below. Instead, she turned away. "I cannot protect you," she whispered. "Nor can I forgive him." "Yours, being me, in your age. Nor can I forgive him." That night, unable to bear the silence, the Queen descended once more to the hidden chamber. She brought the crown with her, its weight heavy in her trembling hands. Thomas stood waiting. "It was never meant for me," he said softly. "But perhaps it was never meant for anyone." She placed the crown on the table between them. "If the truth must come, let it come through me," she whispered. He looked at her, not as a queen, but as his sister. "Then you'll lose everything," he said. "Perhaps," she replied. "But so did you." The candlelight between them flickered, as if uncertain which of their shadows would survive the dawn. The morning papers hit the palace gates before sunrise. "The lost Windsor heir, royal bloodline in question," screamed every headline. Eleanor watched from her study as the news vans assembled outside the iron gates, their lenses like bayonets pointed at her legacy. Lady Margaret burst in, face pale. "Your Majesty, the press claims photographic proof, a letter with your father's seal." Eleanor said nothing. The world she'd ruled through restraint now demanded confession. Beyond the window, London woke in outrage and fascination. The Queen's reflection trembled in the glass, a monarch haunted by truth. "It seems," she murmured, "the ghosts have finally found their audience." In the cabinet room, Prime Minister Richard Hargrove's voice thundered through the line. "Your Majesty, we cannot contain this. Parliament is calling for transparency and DNA confirmation." Eleanor's grip tightened around the receiver. "Do you suggest I parade my family before the nation like a spectacle?" "I suggest survival," he replied coolly. She ended the call without another word. Across the room, Thomas stood near the window, gazing at the crowd gathering below. "They won't forgive us," he said quietly. "They never forgive me." She looked at him, her voice breaking. "You were never given the chance to be forgiven." By evening, the palace was surrounded. Camera flashes cut through the fog like lightning. Inside, Eleanor met with her private advisor, Archbishop William Darrow, whose loyalty was steeped in faith, not politics. "Confession brings absolution, Your Majesty," he urged softly. "But absolution does not rebuild thrones." "Then perhaps the throne should fall," she whispered. He crossed himself. "Do not speak treason." She rose slowly, regal even in despair. "Truth isn't treason, Archbishop. It's inheritance." Outside, chants rose from the gates, the people demanding answers. The palace walls seemed to breathe with their fury, every echo a countdown to revelation. As night fell, Eleanor descended once more to the east wing. Thomas waited there, surrounded by old letters and the hollow silence of destiny. Fulfilled. "They know," she said. "They'll demand to see you." His expression softened. "Then let them. I have no crown to lose." She approached him, the faint tremor in her voice betraying fear. "You don't understand. If I confirm this, the monarchy ends." He smiled sadly. "Then maybe it's time something ended." She looked at her brother. The man her father erased. The man history had denied. And for the first time, she envied his freedom. At midnight, Eleanor addressed the nation from her private study. Cameras rolled. The world watched. Her voice, calm yet tremulous, carried across oceans. "Every crown bears a shadow. Ours is no different. The truth I reveal tonight may alter the history of this kingdom, but I can no longer allow silence to be its heir." In the silence that followed, she glanced at the empty chair beside her, the one meant for her brother. The broadcast cut to the palace gates, where crowds gasped, prayed, and wept. In the east wing below, Thomas listened, eyes closed, whispering only 2 words. "Thank you." The nation awoke in disbelief. Television anchors spoke her name as if it belonged to myth, not monarchy. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, half in outrage, half in awe. Within the palace, silence ruled. Queen Eleanor stood before the mirror, stripped of her crown, her reflection smaller now, not diminished, but human. "They will come for me," she murmured. Lady Margaret entered, trembling. "Your Majesty, the Privy Council is convening an emergency session. They may demand abdication." Eleanor nodded. "Then let them. A throne built on lies is already vacant." Outside, Big Ben tolled, its echo carrying like a judgment through the rain. Parliament erupted in fury. Prime Minister Richard Hargrove's voice carried over the roar. "The monarchy's legitimacy stands in question. We cannot sustain a sovereign who falsified bloodline history." Across the chamber, some rose in defense, others in condemnation. The Queen watched the broadcast alone, her hands clasped so tightly they whitened. In another room, Thomas watched the same broadcast with tears in his eyes. "You told the truth," he whispered to the screen. "And they call it treason." The sound of thunder drowned his words. In that moment, both siblings, one above, one below, realized truth had no home in palaces or parliaments. That night, the Queen requested privacy. Alone in her study, she opened her father's final letter, the one sealed beneath his diary. The handwriting trembled, as though written in guilt. "If the truth ever surfaces, remember this. I sinned for the crown, not against it." Tears blurred the words. "No, father," she whispered. "You sinned against us." She placed the letter into the fire. The parchment curled, blackened, then turned to ash. The crown on her desk reflected the flame, its jewels catching the orange glow, not as symbols of power, but of penance. Outside, the storm refused to end. Thomas wandered the palace corridors, seeing for the first time the gilded prison that had defined his sister's life. Servants turned away as he passed, unsure whether to bow or flee. In the grand hall, he paused beneath the mural of their ancestors, all crowned, all smiling, none honest. "You don't belong here," a guard murmured, his voice unsure. Thomas smiled faintly. "Neither does anyone else." For the first time in decades, he walked freely through the palace, the very ground that once entombed him. Yet freedom tasted hollow. The truth, now spoken, had freed no one, only shifted the burden. At sunset, Eleanor met Thomas in the palace gardens, the first place untouched by secrecy. Autumn leaves rustled beneath their feet as dusk bled across the sky. "They will take the throne from me tomorrow," she said quietly. Thomas nodded. "Then perhaps you can finally be free." She looked at him, her voice barely a breath. Freedom was never ours to claim. We inherited chains, not crowns. He took her hand gently. For a fleeting moment, the world beyond the gates disappeared. There were no titles, no lies, only two siblings bound by truth, facing the twilight of an empire. The palace no longer belonged to the queen. It belonged to history. Reporters lined the gates, protesters filled the mall, and soldiers stood in uneasy ranks, unsure whom they still served. Inside, Queen Eleanor sat before her advisors, their words dissolving into noise. "Abdication would preserve what remains," said Lord Whitby, his voice clipped with fear. "Preserve what?" she asked, her tone calm, almost tender. "The illusion?" No one answered. No one answered. She stood, her voice steady now. "If truth costs me a crown, then the crown was counterfeit." As she walked from the room, her reflection shimmered in the golden mirrors. Regal, broken, and unafraid. In the east courtyard, soldiers whispered rumors that Parliament would vote to dissolve the monarchy within days. Inside, Thomas watched the crowd from behind heavy curtains. "They look at me as if I'm a ghost," he said softly. Lady Margaret entered, hesitant. "You're more than that, Mr. Windsor. You're proof." "Proof of what?" he asked bitterly. "That the crown bleeds." Her silence said more than words could. From the distance came in the echo of chanting. "And the crown. And the lie." Thomas's gaze fell upon the gardens where he and Eleanor once stood. "The crown may break," he whispered, "but truth endures." By nightfall, the Queen summoned her final audience with Prime Minister Hargrove. "You cannot stop this," he said, voice cold but trembling beneath its authority. "History already has its verdict." "History has no heart," she replied. "But I do." She handed him a sealed letter. "What is this? My abdication? And my final confession. It will be read publicly tomorrow." He stared at her, disbelief softening into reluctant respect. "You would dismantle your own reign." She smiled faintly. "No, I will end my father's." The room fell silent, the weight of centuries balanced in a single woman's grace. As dawn crept across London, the Queen walked alone through the palace halls for the last time. Portraits of her ancestors watched silently as she passed. She paused beneath her father's painting, the once proud eyes now seeming to flinch beneath her gaze. "You built this empire on fear," she whispered. I will end it with truth." Behind her, "They were waiting for you," he said. "And you?" "I have nowhere else to go." She turned, tears in her eyes. "Then stand beside me." For the first time, the two Windsors walked the corridor together. Not heirs, not royalty, but survivors. The courtyard overflowed with press, officials, and citizens awaiting the Queen's word. Eleanor stepped forward, Thomas a pace behind her. Cameras clicked like thunder. "Today," she began, "I relinquish the crown not in disgrace but in honesty. The monarchy as it stands ends with me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. She reached for her brother's hand. "But the truth, for which this kingdom has waited, begins with us." The two stood beneath a sky finally free of storm as Big Ben struck noon. Not in mourning, but in rebirth. In that moment, history bowed and silence finally broke into light. The palace gates closed for the final time beneath Eleanor's rule. News outlets called it the end of the monarchy. To the Queen, it was simply the end of silence. Within the emptied halls, her footsteps echoed like history exhaling. The portraits had been removed, the throne draped in linen, and the scent of dust replaced the perfume of power. She paused beside the window where she had once watched her people through the fog of deception. Now the air was clear. "It was never about the crown," she whispered. "It was about the truth that wore it." For the first time, her reflection smiled, not as a ruler, but as a woman freed. Thomas walked the palace gardens as autumn surrendered to winter. Children played outside the gates, unaware of the history that had unraveled beyond the iron bars. He carried a single photograph. Their mother, smiling faintly in the servants' garden, the same spot where he now stood. "You were never meant for a palace," he murmured. "Neither was I." Behind him, Eleanor's voice carried softly on the wind. "But perhaps we were meant to free it." He turned, meeting her eyes with quiet gratitude. For decades he had lived beneath the ground. Now, the open sky itself felt like redemption. London adjusted quickly. The people, once subjects, now spoke of the Windsors in tones of reluctant reverence, not for their reign, but for their reckoning. Universities debated Eleanor's abdication as moral courage. Tabloids called her the queen who chose truth over throne. In a small town north of London, she watched the coverage in a modest cottage garden, tea steaming in her hands. The quiet suited her. The world no longer belonged to crowns, and perhaps at last it belonged to conscience. Yet sometimes when the wind rustled the trees, she could swear she heard the faint echo of her father's voice. Finally, at peace. Thomas visited her often, though he never stayed long. The world viewed him as a mystery, the man erased, then reborn. Yet he wanted none of its fascination. On one visit, he brought her a simple gift, the silver key she had once used to open the hidden door. "Keep it," he said, "so we never forget where truth was locked." She turned it in her hands, the metal now dulled by time. "And where it was freed," she added. Together, they walked toward the meadow beyond the cottage, their footsteps sinking into soft earth, two survivors of a dynasty that had finally laid itself to rest. At dusk, the cottage was silent except for the gentle ticking of a clock. Eleanor sat by the window, writing her final words in a leather-bound journal. Power fades, but truth endures. If history remembers me, let it remember that I chose to end a lie, not a reign. She closed the book and placed the crown, now tarnished, dimmed by years, beside it. Outside, Thomas stood among the fields, looking toward the horizon where the palace silhouette once rose. The wind carried the scent of rain and freedom. Above them, the sky stretched unclaimed, vast and eternal, the final heir to all their secrets.